So now we start the last chapter that is for the nervous system. This is nervous system 3, the senses. So this is going to start with some general senses with the body and, touch, feel, hot, cold, pain, that kind of stuff. And then we're going to move towards the majority of the chapter will be on your special senses, which is part of your face and your head. Okay. So general senses first. These are, like I said, throughout the body. So they're widely distributed in all parts of the body. They're going to pick up things like touch, feel, hot, cold, pain, those kinds of things. So we're going to see it in the skin, especially because the skin is going to determine what's going on between your internal and external environment, but also with organs and joints. So with organs, you can think of something like, digestive pains, gas pains, or something. And then the joints too, as you need to either, you can feel pain from the joints, but you also need to sense sort of the body positioning you're in so that you have the ability to move back and forth. And I introduced that term in the last chapter as proprioception. So we'll refer back to that again too. Then special senses. Special senses are these ones with the specialized receptors for picking up light waves, for picking up sound waves. So sight and hearing, smell, taste, those kinds of things. And they are in the head. So these things are going to be the things that are associated with your face and your head as far as your ears, eyes, nose, and mouth. All right, sensory receptors themselves have to have the ability to pick up some sort of change in the internal or external environment to send that information to the brain. So they are specialized cells that have this job of picking that up. They might be, in some cases, a multicellular, so you might have this connection between a cell and other cells before it sends it to the brain. But basically, for the most part, think of it as a specialized cell or a group of specialized cells that are going to pick up this information. They also must transmit that information towards the central nervous system. So you have to have neurons that can pick up on what these specialized sensory receptors are getting from the environment and then relay that message back to the brain so that you can understand what is going on with your body. So that gets us to when your brain gets hold of it, that's a sensation. So this is when your brain actually says, I feel cold, or I feel warmth, or I feel the touch of the tabletop, or whatever it is. The sensation that you get from that sense, okay? But it's really because your brain is telling you something about it. It becomes aware of that sensory impulse. And then you take that information in the brain. Once you become aware of that impulse, then you have to start trying to make some sort of sense out of that impulse. So we have this thing called perception. Perception is your view of that stimulus. So how am I interpreting it? And it can be, something like pain, or it could be something like, it's cold or something. But it's associated a lot with your limbic system and stuff too. So if it's a smell, it could be a good smell. It could be a bad smell. It might be something that you consider, in other words, pleasant or unpleasant to you. Your associations that you have made from learning, from instinct, some things like the smell of rotting types of materials are not something you learn to dislike. It's something that's more of an instinct. But the smell of a certain fruit or a certain vegetable might be a learned versus a not, a learned pleasant versus a learned unpleasant type of perception to it. We do smells especially are highly associated with our emotions and our perceptions of things. All right, so when we get a sensation, so here's our pathway. We're going to use the apple as an example because if you think of an apple, you've already got this association in your head. It might be a red apple, a green apple, but you have a general shape, you have a texture, you have an exterior texture versus an interior fruit texture, you have a smell, you have a taste. So when we have that apple, and think about that apple sitting in your hand and then taking a bite out of it, right? You've got all these little sensory receptors that are going to pick that up, and that just depends on what it is. The smell of the apple is going to be your olfactory cells in your nose. If you take a bite out of it, then you've got taste buds that are also bringing in information. And by the way, these two are very highly related to each other. Smell and taste are both chemical receptors, so we really tie those into each other. But then you also have the sight of the apple. I saw it. So the rods and cones in your retina of your eye are going to pick up the colors and the shape and the light and everything that's going in. And then if you take that bite, you've got a hearing sensation. So we have the cochlea that's involved that has these little hair cells. And we're going to learn about each one of these. So don't kind of get there yet. But each of those is going to be picking up its own information, relaying that information. So it has to go down the nerve fibers, right, to the brain. So either spinal nerves or, in most cases, since it's in the head, it's going to be these cranial nerves of some sort to the brain. The brain then directs that activity to the right portion of the brain. So you go to the right portion of the brain in order to start making the associations, accessing those memories of what it is. And then you get this perception, a pleasant smell. For some of you, an apple may not be a pleasant smell, so it's not something that you like. It's something most people, I don't think, have an aversion to it. But it's a smell that comes to that, and then the taste, the color, the crunching sound, and your brain takes all of that information and says, this is the smell of an apple, this is the taste of an apple, this is the sight. But you don't sit there and think about each of those separately. You bring all of that information together into one idea of this is an apple, and you make a memory of it. So the next time that you're holding that apple in your hand, you might only be getting sight of that apple, but you really have the memories of all of these other things that are going on that can bring that together, so you know what to expect and what you're going to get from that apple. So that's all that association going on. All right, so let's look at those receptor types. I said each one had a special job, right? So we have these receptors called chemoreceptors. Chemoreceptors really respond to some sort of chemical, and that is smell is a chemoreceptor, and taste are both chemoreceptors. That's why I have the little tongue right here. So when you pick up, you bite into something or you smell something, both of those are chemoreceptors that are taking in that and responding to the specific chemical. It's not anything else on there, but it's that chemical that is entering in through the nose, through the mouth, and then innervating one of those chemoreceptors that then transmits that impulse on. We have pain receptors that are also referred to sometimes as nociceptors. Pain receptors, fine, but nociceptors. So any sort of tissue damage is going to stimulate them to send information to your brain. And really that's a good thing. They stop doing what you're doing because this is dangerous to the skin. I'm going to have a damage if I continue this. Notice how close they are to the surface. We want that information quick. We don't want to do a lot of damage and go all the way down to here before you stimulate a pain receptor, because then you'll have done way more damage than you really want done to your body at that point. Next group is called thermoreceptors or thermoceptors. Thermoreceptors are for temperature. So anything with temperature in there. It can be hot, it can be cold. It's usually not really hot or cold. It's more like warm or cool. So they respond to within a certain range. They are also pretty close to the surface, but they're not as close as those little pain receptors. But so you have to kind of get through. Remember, this is the epidermis up here. So epidermis up here and the dermis. They're at the edge of that border between the dermis and the epidermis. So pretty close to the surface. They're going to get response pretty quickly. Mechanoreceptors are any sort of receptor that needs to change shape, basically, to be stimulated. So as you put like pressure or mechanical force on them, the receptor actually squishes or deforms in some way, and then that sends that information on. So it's not a matter of a chemical touching it or something. It actually, you have to put enough pressure to get it to change shape. So I can like lightly touch my desk, and I haven't stimulated these mechanoreceptors. I have to push down on the desk in order to form those receptors before I feel some sort of the pressure that's in there. And then under that, we have several different types. So you have proprioceptors that I brought up with the cranial nerves, right? So these things are always going to be checking for how tense your muscles, your tendons are, so that I've got my arm at a 40-degree angle. So if I want to move it straight out, this is how much work I'm going to have to do to get that arm to go straight out. Your head can be tilted. This is information you're constantly sending back to your brain. So you might be watching TV with your head on your hand, but now I need to move position. Well, you don't really think my head is at this position, I need to move it straight up. You're constantly sending information about the tension in the neck and the muscles there, and then your brain sort of has this constant inventory of what's going on, and then you can make the appropriate adjustments without even really considering the fact I just moved position, right? And it was smooth. It was a smooth transition. Baroreceptors. Baro means like pressure, so a barometer measures the change in pressure in the atmosphere, like when we have a storm or something moving in, a barometer will do that. We can also call them presoreceptors sometimes, but basically what they're doing is measuring the pressure within blood vessels. So they're looking at your blood pressure and making sure that you're under normal circumstances, your blood pressure doesn't go too high, it doesn't go too low. So if it starts to kind of drop, blood pressure drops, then you send information to the heart to start pumping more and stuff. If it goes too high, and then you send information to the heart to slow down a little bit. So basically it's keeping the right amount of blood flowing through your body by always keeping inventory and measuring what the current situation is, so that you can make those appropriate changes. And that's that homeostatic message. Not too high, not too low, make small changes and keep it at homeostasis. We also have stretch receptors. Stretch receptors are things like, think about when you eat dinner or you eat lunch. If you eat too much, you get the sensation of being really full, okay? They're going to stretch that stomach. When your stomach stretches out, they stretch and say, this is enough, don't overfill it. The other place that you see that are in the lungs. So as I breathe in, my lungs are going to inflate. I don't want to breathe in too much. I don't need to breathe in too much. So they detect how much is in, and you stop that inhale, and then you breathe out. And again, you don't exhale too much because of the stretch receptors sending that information to your brain that says it's time for the exhale motion to occur, the inhale motion to occur. These can also be stimulated to make you inhale more on occasion. So if you detect some more chemoreceptors in it, if you detect carbon dioxide in your pH level of your blood changing, then I'm going to need to inhale more to get more oxygen in it and exhale that carbon dioxide out. So you do have that ability to working together. So these mechanoreceptors, chemoreceptors, all of these things work together too. Photoreceptors are only found in one place in the body, that is in the eye. They are highly specialized cells that respond to light. And you can see I've got a picture in here of the light. Here's the light coming in from the outside. So this is light coming into your eye. It goes past the nervous. Notice it's not a great setup here. It goes past all the nervous relay back to these receptors, stimulates right back here, and then comes back and gets sent along these receptors, basically usually one direction, but we're talking 3D, to the optic nerve cord that will then take it to the brain eventually. So all of that sort of is the pool of that information. But these are the receptors. And notice I've got some that are little cone shaped. Those are actually called cones. And some that are rod shaped. Those are called rods. So we have cones and we have rods. And we will come back to their specific jobs too. Spend some time on the eye. All right, so all of those receptors are working in your body all the time, hopefully, for a normal, healthy body, right? They pick up something, and then they've got to relay this message. So we have to first stimulate the receptor. The receptor gets stimulated. There's a local change in, sodium, potassium, blah, 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 all of that kind of stuff that we talked about before. And if it's enough to change the potential, you're going to send an electrical current, which we call impulse, action potential, all of that, okay? And then that's going to be further conducted to the next step, okay? So here's two things. If the receptor is actually already part of a neuron, then all it has to do is to stimulate that action potential and send that information on, and it's going to go, through the nerves to the brain eventually. If it's separate, if it's not part of a neuron, if it's a separate little receptor, then it's going to have to go through its first relay station. So the receptor picks up the information, and then it's going to have to transmit it to some sort of neuron, right? to be relayed. So it gets transferred first. Okay. Eventually, all of them are going to be transferred from, the peripheral to the central nervous system, across interneurons to the brain and all that. But sometimes the receptor is actually part of a neuron and sometimes it's not. So it's just what's the first step in transfer going on in there. Peripheral nerves outside the central nervous system have to conduct it to the central nervous system, which then, sends it to the appropriate areas of the brain. You make association, you access memories, and then the sensation is becoming aware of it, but your brain is doing all of this at one time. Okay. We also have this ability that's called projection. And it's really it's a very, very important thing. Basically, when your brain becomes aware of something coming in, say somebody's talking to you, so it's coming in through the ear over here, but you can turn your head to the exact location of that person may not be on your right side, right? They might be on your left side. That ear maybe isn't working, but anyway, or straight in front of you. You don't turn your head to the right side because you got the information from that right side. You turn your head towards wherever that information is coming from. That's called projection. We can take the input from both of those, and the brain says, where is this sensation coming from? Same thing goes for touch. If I touch something hot or something warm or whatever, my brain can project where that came from based off the nerves that are being stimulated and everything. I know where it's coming from outside my body. So what is the source of that information? It allows you to actually pinpoint the region. Now think of that on a survival level. It's important in day to day, but think of it on a survival level. So for other animals, like something that's normally prey, they need to know if they hear a rustle in the bush, right? They need to know which way that's coming from so that they can run the opposite direction away from this. So this is really an important area of the brain for survival instincts and day-to-day actions. We also have, the brain has this wonderful ability, you'll probably realize this as you listen to these notes sometimes, you have the wonderful ability to ignore things. So if your brain determines it's unimportant, or if something else is going on at the time that it needs to pay more attention to, you ignore unimportant stimuli. You're being bombarded with all kinds of information all the time. You've got the light coming in that's showing you things. If you have the TV going on in the background while you're doing your notes or listen, you've got those light waves flashing at you. You've got people talking to you. You've got things that you need to pay attention to, and then things that you need to ignore. Your brain cannot possibly take in all of that information and make sense of all of that. So it basically just kind of ignores or shuts down part of it. The one that's the most probably thing that you can relate to really is think about the air conditioner running, or if you're sitting in your kitchen, the sound of the refrigerator. You really don't listen to that. You really don't pay attention to it. That is sound coming in. That is information that should be going into the brain. But until somebody really points it out, you don't even realize that that is occurring. The time that you realize it, like I said, if somebody points it out or if it stops. So if you're sitting in a classroom and the air conditioner is running and you haven't paid attention to that it's running, and think about a classroom maybe with the projectors pointing, you can hear the hum of the projector. You really don't hear it. You don't pay attention to it until it stops. If that air conditioner stops in the classroom, suddenly everybody pays attention because it's like something just happened. And, I'm going to get hot in a few minutes if it doesn't come back on. So it's really a decreased response to stimuli that are coming in because it's not something that you really have to pay attention to right at this time. You don't have to devote energy that's in your brain to actually paying attention to this. So it allows you to conserve energy, and it allows you to focus your energy on what really you need to pay attention to. We call this adaptation after a while. Okay, so peripheral adaptation, you adapt to this stimulus, and speaking of refrigerators in the background, you adapt to this stimulus and you kind of just stop sending information to that. Another one that is a good example is the sense of smell. So if you spray perfume on yourself, you smell that right away. You've got this really high level of sensation going on, but your smell adapts really, really quickly, and you stop smelling it pretty quickly. And the danger becomes a lot of people, especially young kids and stuff who are just kind of getting into their teens and learning this, they'll spray that perfume again because they're like, it went away and I don't smell it anymore. Well, it's still there. Their brain just stopped paying attention to it. So what they have to do is give a stronger impulse to those nerves, to the brain, for the brain to pay attention again. And so you spray again, they can smell it, and they're like, oh, it's back again. Well, it never went away, so now they just got to have this double dose of it. If somebody else walks in their room, they're like, whoa, you just go easy on that. It's a little bit too much, but you adapted so quickly, you don't smell it anymore. It's also something I tell you with dissections too. If we do in classes where we do dissections, people are always like, it smells, it smells, it smells. And I'm like, just breathe through it and you'll stop smelling it. If you constantly cover your nose, you're refreshing. So you're giving a stronger impulse over and over, and you constantly refresh, you constantly smell it. But if you just breathe through it after a while, your brain just ignores it. All right, starting, like I said, with general senses. We're going to start with the general senses. So this is really associated a lot with the skin, but, proprioception and stuff, muscles, joints, and viscera. So this is like really, it involves a lot of the muscles and everything, skin and the face, but it's not those highly organized, highly specialized senses. So, everything down here is going to be strictly general senses, where things in here are going to be both general and specialized senses. Don't forget the viscera. I don't know if I said that. All right. Long terms, long names. Exteroceptive. This just means receptive right here, but extero means from the outside. You can also be shortened to just exteroceptor, so it makes it easier. There's a receptor in there and extero. But anyway, the exteroceptors are anything with the surface of your skin and your body. So fine touch, like I'm barely touching the tabletop. Pressure as I push down on something, but also your temperature and your pain. So anything with the skin and bringing in information from the outside. So we learned, we'll learn in lab, Meissner's corpuscles and Pacinian corpuscles. If you look, Pacinian are deep in the cells. These are for pressure. So Pacinian are the pressure. Meissner's are near the edge of the dermis and the epidermis, and these are really for like touch. Okay, but they're big pads still. Viscera, that refers to the viscera. So visceroceptive or entero, meaning enter, inside. These are things that are going to be dealing with changes internally in your body. So your blood pressure, trying to keep that the same. So the stretching of the blood vessels that indicate whether you're at high pressure if they're stretched or low pressure if they're not stretched. Also, I mentioned eating a meal. So as your stomach stretches, as you bring in food, you get that sensation of being full. You get the sensation of being overfull if it's too stretched out. Those are those interoceptors that are telling your body about those things and trying to maintain homeostasis there. Proprioception I talked about before. So proprioceptive senses or proprioception is that constant keeping track of, how tense a muscle is or the tendons that are there. So you're constantly sending information to the central nervous system, to the brain of what position all of your limbs are in based off the stretching of those muscles and the stretching of those tendons. So that when I make a movement, it's a smooth movement. It's a change that can occur based off of, I already know where my body arm is or where my legs are or what position those are in, so I can make a smooth transition. And that's constantly going on. All these are constantly going on. All right, free nerve endings. So here, like right here, this Pacinian corpuscle, notice it's a big round fat pad, right? So are those Meissner's and some of those others. But some of these nerve endings, this one right here that I'm tracing right here, actually go up and they just branch out into small little branches, okay? So like right in here. Those are called free nerve endings. They don't end in a pad. Okay. They go all the way up and they extend right past that dermis into the epidermis. So we see them enter into the epidermal tissues. Okay. Just a little bit, not to the edge, but kind of right at that borderline right in there. Sometimes it depends. Sometimes you see the pictures that right just before it. Sometimes they kind of go right into the epidermis a little bit, but they're definitely in your epithelial. So it's that dermal, epidermal sort of transitional layer in there. They're very simple. They don't have the pads. They provide different senses. One of those is that sense of itching. So when you get that just itching thing here, this is, speaking of, and it's also, by the way, very suggestive. So if I talk about itching, or you think about itching, or you think somebody says mosquitoes or fleas or something, and you start itching, it's not that you have to actually have one on you necessarily. It's a suggestive sort of common instincts or from a communal type of atmosphere. If somebody else has a mosquito, somebody else has fleas on them, or the dog has fleas, then there is the possibility that that could jump to you. And if you're itching, basically you're brushing them off of your skin, so it's protecting your skin. So just the mere suggestion that there is that possibility you could itch, then same thing in the hair and everything, but makes you want to do that action too. So we have this group action, this communal action of itching also. But really, what it is these nerve endings getting stimulated, these little free nerve endings that tell you something is on me. I need to get it off, and that's going to protect you in the long run. Like I said, you can make yourself want to itch through that suggestive method. Meisners are for touch. So this is tactile. So Meisners are those touch. They're near the surface. They're right here on the edge of that dermis, extending not into the epidermal layer, but you remember how you have the epidermis here and the dermis right here, and you have those extensions up into that. That's what kind of where they lay. So they lay into those little papilla, the dermal papilla right here, and then extend down. So you have that up and down ridge going on in there. Those are called Meissner's corpuscles. Okay. Generally, we find them in areas that don't have a lot of hair. Okay, because they're for touch. Your hair, you're covered. You're not going to do a lot there. High amount in the skin, like especially right when we get towards even more towards the fingertips and stuff, but also in the lips. Remember, the lips are very sensitive area too. So this is our fine touch. And I've talked about it before where you have the 2 points. So I can distinguish 2 points on my fingertip. If you close your eye and somebody touches you, I can define 2 points on my fingertip very, very close together. But as I move to things like my forearm and close your eyes and somebody touches you, really it feels like one finger touching you at a very far distance. So where in the fingertip, I can distinguish 2 little points touching me very, very close together. Here, I have less of these little Meissner's corpuscles, so it really feels like one. But you don't explore here. You explore with your fingertips, not with your arms. So you really don't need to dedicate a lot of these corpuscles to this area of your body or any other area. You need to dedicate a lot of them to places that are used for that purpose. And you do. Pacinian, also called lamellated, but Pacinian corpuscles are for pressure. Okay, so Pacinian is pressure. These are in the dermis, but they're much deeper in the dermis, so you need to put pressure down through the skin, start deforming, basically with that pressure, all these layers before you actually come in contact with these. We don't want to send off an information too quick that says high pressure by having them close to the surface. You want actually to get to have some work done before you get to those high pressure, and that tells you, yeah, that's pressure, deep pressure. Okay, heavy pressure, also vibrations stimulate these too. So deep in the tissue, like I said, but you can also find them in tendons and ligaments because they're going to be part of that proprioception. So here's kind of a general overlook near the surface. So in this region right here, you've got epidermis, and then we have dermis. Up near the surface, you have the free nerve endings. You have Meissner's corpuscles up here, and then deeper down we have Pacinian I guess that's where they have the Pacinian right here, but you have the Pacinian that are much deeper down in those tissue layers, not near the surface. All right, temperature. Why does something feel warm or why does something feel cold? We have temperature sensations that have a range. So our warmth goes between, in Celsius, 25 to 45. In terms of Fahrenheit, which is what we're more familiar with in the United States, that's about 77 to 113. This isn't burning yet, so it's not burning your skin, but it's telling you that something is warm. If it gets above this range, so above 113, then we're going to start stimulating the pain sensors and not these warm receptors, okay? So this is just, we're warm, but we're not damaging yet. Pain receptors may not be to the heat index where it's damaging, but you're getting close, so it starts saying, hey, you need to stop before you actually do damage to the skin. So it's only within this range here. Likewise, cold receptors go down below a normal range. So in terms of Celsius, it's 10 to 20. In terms of Fahrenheit, that's about 50 degrees and 68 degrees Fahrenheit that says that this is cold. Remember, your body temperature in Fahrenheit is around 98.6. In terms of Celsius, it's 37 degrees Celsius. So it's well below, either way you look at it, it's well below our normal body temperature. But that says, hey, this is pretty cold. If I get below 10 degrees, again, it's no longer a cold receptor. It's going to be a pain receptor because, once again, we're getting closer to the point 0 in Celsius is freezing. So as we move below 10, we're getting close to that point of freezing, and that freezing point is going to start doing damage. Long-term exposure to cold will do damage. All right, so anything that is below 10 degrees Celsius or above 45 degrees Celsius, these are going to stimulate our pain receptors. And look at where the pain receptors are. They are free nerve endings to start off with, and they're really, really close to the surface. So they're extending up into that epidermal region, and they're saying, hey, stop whatever it is you're doing. We need to take care of this before damage occurs. So we can have, a little bit going on here. We really don't want to get down into anything deeper and damage those areas. So they're the kind of the first things to pick up on information and send that so that you can protect all of that tissue. Pain, like I said, it's free nerve endings. They're widely distributed throughout their body. So they're not like the touch ones that are like in your fingertips. These guys are everywhere because I need to protect all of this, right? So we've got them everywhere except really in the brain. So if you get in like brain surgery, they'll cut through the skin, cut through the skull. Those have nerve endings because the skin has nerve endings. But once they get into the brain itself, there's no pain receptors there, and they'll keep you awake for brain surgery so that you can respond and tell them what's going on, and they answer questions, and they know that you're in pretty good shape usually in there. But the brain itself doesn't need pain receptors. It's pretty well protected, so it's not something that needs to send information back. Now, other tissues in the brain will have pain receptors. So this is really the nervous tissue. So you can interpret like blood vessels and aneurysms and headaches and stuff like that. You do have that sensation of pain, but you don't. The neurons themselves aren't going to have that pain. Any sort of damage that could occur to the body is going to stimulate these pain receptors. So actual tissue damage. I cut myself. I burn myself. Extremes in temperature. Chemical burns can cause pain receptors to be stimulated, and severe mechanical. Think about crushing. So crushing the fingers, crushing the hand. You've got to say that that extreme amount of pressure is going to do damage to that tissue. I need to send a pain force to it. And these, unlike like smell that adapts and you stop smelling it, these are not going to adapt. It is to your advantage to constantly feel that pain so that you discontinue that action if at all possible. So you're going to keep sending pain impulses to it. There's not this adaptation that goes on like on other things in there. It's bad because you continue to feel the pain and you can't seem to relieve the pain without some sort of external, chemical, whether it's one you make with your own endorphins, or if it's morphine or codeine or just Tylenol or something. But these things are going to keep sending that pain to your body. All right. Visceral pain. This is, from the viscera inside your body. You also have pain receptors for that. You're well aware of that. Heart attacks will send pain. So will gastrointestinal distress sends pain. You can get pain in the side, your kidneys or something. So we know we have pain receptors there too. And again, that's telling you that there is something wrong that needs to be addressed pretty quickly in order to rectify the problem. Problem is interior. We don't tend to have as many localized pain receptors, and pain receptors will actually service a larger area. So, like for instance, a heart attack it's occurring in the heart itself will actually stimulate pain all the way down the arm, and so you have this sensation that may be occurring in the arm, but it's really telling you there's a heart attack going on because they're servicing a larger area and they're not well organized in there. We call that referred pain. So anything interior in your body may be, you feel pain in one place, but it's in a different place. So it's kind of important to know, if I feel pain in my neck, what is that telling me? So we have little maps for visceral pain in there, and you can see in here. So like if something's going on with the lungs, and the lungs are located right here in the thoracic cavity, right? But the pain themselves, notice where that is. It's in the neck, the lung and diaphragm's right here. So again, the pain is going to be in a different place in there. Your heart, like I said, can be in the heart region, but also extended down the inside of that left arm in there. Some of them are more localized. Look at where you have kidneys. So our kidneys are kind of, back in here, and the kidney pain is going to go down the legs, the external lateral sides of the legs in the back, and across the front in here too. And then you can see like small intestine, ovaries, if you're a female. Kidney pain also centralized right there, even though the kidneys are not right there. So you do have a difference in area in there. Urinary bladder, all kinds of different places. So it is kind of important, here's the liver, to know what that means when you have pain in an area that's not really the location of that organ. All right, nerve pathways. We have different types. We can have acute pain and you can have chronic pain. Acute pain is sharp. Okay, this is our sharp pain. It hurts, and it hurts now, and it's very, very painful. It gets there quickly, it gets to the brain quickly, and it lets you know. And it has to do with the type of fibers. Think acute. A delta fibers there. They're thin fibers, and they're very myelinated. Remember that myelination increases that saltatory conduction. So these things are sending information, and they're sending it really quickly to the brain, and your brain says, that really hurts. So this is that sharp pain that comes along with it. Very well localized too. You can also pinpoint it. I can say, that pain is right here on this section of my arm, and you know exactly where it's coming from. So it's not this, I'm pain all over the place. You know where it's coming from, and you can make adjustments to that. Okay. Chronic pain, C fibers. Chronic means that it's ongoing pain. So it's going to be something that you just feel over and over and over. This tends to be what we consider dull pain. So, not the sharp pain. This is dull, it's aching, and it just seems to be never ending pain. It might go away for a little while, and then it comes back, and it's just this going on. These actually send impulses pretty slowly because they're along unmyelinated fibers. So that myelination speeds impulses up. These are along the unmyelinated, so they're not being sent very quickly, but they do tend to go over for a long period of time without sort of this relief for this. And it's much more difficult for us to pinpoint exactly where it's coming from. It's just like it hurts, and it hurts in this region, but I can't really pinpoint exactly where that, it's not like somebody stuck a pin in my arm right here. It's kind of in this whole region, my joints, my arm, my elbow hurts or something, but it's this kind of whole arm region that's being associated with that. All right, once I get the pain impulses, I'm going to take them to my brain, and my brain is where I'm going to do all the associations. I'm going to do all the figuring out what's going on in there. So you have several parts of the brain that are important in this. The thalamus is coming in, and when it comes in from here's coming in from the spinal cord, right? It hits the thalamus. That's in that diencephalon area, and it says, "Oh, there's pain." So this is the first time you're really aware of the pain. So it's not just that your fingers got cut or something. That has to travel from your finger up the spinal cord to the thalamus, and that's the first time you're aware of pain. And then your cerebral cortex is the part that's going to be doing all the associations, doing all the memories, doing all the whatever, this is what's going on, making that judgment about what the pain is. So it's going to say, how intense is the pain? Is it really sharp? Did I just cut really deep into my finger, or did I just barely prick it? So what is the intensity of that pain at that point? Where is it coming from? What adjustments do I need to make? Move my finger away and all that. And of course, that's happening pretty quickly. You've already done that reflex to pull it away. But my finger hurts, now where exactly what happened in there. And then your emotional responses also get triggered at this point too. The motor, obviously, what am I going to do with this? But the emotional responses, that's when you start crying or you start screaming or you just like, give me a minute. When somebody's like, oh, are you okay? You're like, just give me a minute and I'll get over it. What are the emotional responses? How are you going to react to it? And again, that has to do with age and training and stuff like that. A child that cuts their finger is going to scream and cry and lots of tears and everything, whereas an adult makes it and just kind of, grin and bear it sort of emotional response to it. It's not that it doesn't hurt, but we have a different response as we age and we kind of learn more. Our brain then is going to start saying, hey, I need to inhibit this pain a little bit. I'm getting all this pain. What do I do with that? Let's start modifying that response a little bit. So you release some of those proteins that I talked about in the last chapter that are for pain relief. So enkephalins, serotonins, and endorphins are all released, and this is kind of your little happy drug. So this kind of says it's not that bad, but they help to reduce that level of pain in there. We can also treat pain, and we know that, simple as taking a Tylenol, taking ibuprofen or Motrin or something along those lines to try and inhibit pain to something that's a little bit, aspirin, a little bit more strong, like some of the opiates like morphine and codeine and stuff. But there's different levels of those. Obviously, some of them are more addictive than others, so you want to limit the exposure to them. But we do have pain relief that we can take. And generally that's because, again, I spoke about this earlier, it's because they're using receptors on the cells themselves that we already have. They work because the cell has a receptor for an endogenous pain reliever like the enkephalins and the endorphins and stuff. So if they use those same receptors, then they can actually work as a pain reliever at that point. Acetaminophen, also known as Tylenol, this was discovered in 1878 by accident. Some researchers were researching something else entirely, grabbed a bottle off the shelf that was mismarked, and they thought they were doing that. And they're like, oh, side effect of this thing that we're studying is that it relieves pain. And then they found out it was mismarked, and they were actually working with acetaminophen, but marketed as Tylenol, and now we have Tylenol. Some other drugs, we're always trying to find good pain relievers. That's a big market because, people don't like to be in pain, and especially chronic pain over, that hurts them all the time. So some of the others, 2005, we had for some reason I'm flubbing my words today, ziconotide. But basically, it comes from this very, very dangerous cone snail. Cone snail is this snail that has a paralyzing amino acid sequence protein type of agent that it injects into its victims, basically its prey, that paralyzes them immediately, and then they can feed at leisure. Well, it also works on humans. So if you're out, they're aquatic. If you're out and you get actually come in contact with one of these and get injected with this agent, then really what they find is that people don't even make it back to shore in time. So you're out scuba diving or you're out snorkeling or something. It's very, very quick, and it just paralyzes everything. Well, we made a synthetic version of it and modified it so that basically what it does is it just sort of temporarily paralyzes those pain nerve fibers so that you can reduce that pain. Proprioception, I've brought it up in the last chapter. I brought it up again earlier. Now we're going to kind of just talk about it again here. These are those mechanoreceptors, so they respond to changes in shape of the receptors, and they're found within the muscles and the tendons and everything, basically just to kind of give you a running inventory of what your body is positioning is at any time, so you can make appropriate changes to your body position as you want to move. So tension of the muscles, tension of the tendons, body position, and of course from the peripheral to the central nervous system. And there's different types of mechanoreceptors that work here. I mentioned Pacinian for pressure, so those are in the joints. You have muscle spindles, which are in skeletal muscle. So they're in the muscles themselves, and then Golgi tendons, which are tells you right there, Golgi tendon organs, which are in the tendons. So we're looking at what position is my joint in, as far as the degree of bending, maybe 30-degree angle on the arm, or it's 180, whatever it is. Then the amount of pressure on the skeleton, the skeletal muscles and the tendons themselves. So all of that information is being sent to your brain all the time. So you constantly have this unaware capacity of where all of my limbs are and what position they are at any time, so that I can make smooth transitions. Here's some of them. So here's a muscle here, and you can see the nerve fiber coming in through and innervating that muscle in there. And here again on the tendon itself. But basically, they're just kind of always monitoring the amount of stretch that's going on. Visceral senses, these are, again, visceral, so internal organs. And again, they're constantly monitoring your environment. So something as simple as the pressure that we have of blood pressure all the time, but also like, I just ate. Am I full? Am I over full? Have I had enough? When I stop? They tend to act slowly, though, in this factor here. So the stomach ones send information to the brain slowly. So if you eat really quickly, you tend to get over full, and then you get that discomfort from having too much food in the stomach, because as you're filling that stomach up, it's expanding, it's sending information to the brain, but it's sending it kind of at a slow speed. So you get this over full, and the brain doesn't get the message quick enough. And then by the time the brain gets the message, you've got too much in there. So it's always a good idea to kind of slow down your eating or manage the quantity. So you say, I only have 15 minutes between this activity and this activity. I'm going to eat now, but I'm only going to eat this much, so that you don't get that overfill the stomach in there. It's also giving you that other discomfort that you might have with intestinal gas. So if you've got stomach cramps and stuff like that, it's really your intestines and the amount of gas. So as the gas accumulates in your intestine, it's going to put pressure out on the intestine in areas, and that stretch outwards is that intestinal gas filling that you feel through there. And you can feel it through moving through the intestines at times too. Also, it signals heart attacks. So, this is that pain from that. So here's our general senses. So there's a summary of the receptors of the general senses. This is all the stuff I went through. So you can come back and use that as a review. Starting with our special senses, and the rest of the chapter then is dedicated to special senses. So we're going to look at all of these in some accounts. So smell is your olfactory. So when you hear olfactory, think smell. Taste are going to be located only in the taste buds, which is in the mouth. Hearing and equilibrium are in your ears, and then sight in your eyes. So these are all your specialized organs for specialized tasks. Notice the shape of the receptors in here. They're very specialized for their job. These over here, those are general, but these right here are the specialized ones. All right, let's start with sense of smell. The olfactory is smell, and we have nerves that are dedicated to that. You have areas that are dedicated to it in the interior in the space. You've got to get the smell in through the nose, but it enters into the cavities, sinus cavities, and that's where you're going to start picking up on these. They do pick up chemicals. So olfactory is one of those chemoreceptors. So it's the chemicals in the food that you smell. So if you smell the smell of an apple, you smell the smell of barbecue. Everybody's barbecuing these days. You smell that barbecue. It's because those chemicals are drifting through the air. They enter through the nasal cavity or into the nasal cavity, and they hit these little receptors on the end of the neurons there that are specialized for that to attach those chemicals. So that's the chemicals attached to those, and then that sends a nerve impulse, and you send that on. So we have the olfactory receptors first, okay, and then surrounding them. So they're not like, it's not like a bunch of these are just lined up. You have other cells around them that we call support cells. So you're gonna have these other support cells too, but the specialized cells are the only ones that are going to pick up that smell. It's in the nasal cavity, like I said, way up in, when we learn the skull, the superior nasal concha and part of that nasal septum. So they're throughout this sort of area here, but they are high in that area. So it's not like just inside the nose here. It has to travel quite a ways in. This is the olfactory bulb. And what this is part of cranial nerve 1. So I should put it as CN1, cranial nerve 1, that you learned about in the last chapter. So this is our first of the cranial nerves. You can see here, there's neurons in here. So we have these nerve fibers, but down here, this extending down, so nasal cavity is all in here. This is the nasal cavity, so that's a space. So coming in through the nose, then you have all of those chemicals, and they travel way up high in here, and then they hit these little nerve endings that are protruding down into that cavity. These are stimulated. They send the information through, this is the cribriform plate, by the way. Remember that from our skull? So cribriform plate is, and if you remember it, it was very thin and porous. It had a lot of pores in it. Those pores and everything are so those nerves can protrude through there. Then it sends the information to the olfactory bulb, and the olfactory bulb is going to send it through that olfactory nerve, cranial nerve 1, to the brain, to the appropriate place for you to actually respond to that smell. But see, this is all skull, so it's way up in the nasal cavity. There's that olfactory bulb. So once they're stimulated, they travel. You know, it has to go in order. So one stimulates the next. So your olfactory nerves pick up the chemical. They bind the chemical. It goes to the olfactory bulb, like I showed you in the last one. The olfactory bulb then becomes a tract, and that's just a bunch of nerves. It goes into the brain. It's going to hit the limbic system and the olfactory cortex. So the cortex is the part that says, that's that smell. And it tells you that's the smell of an apple. That's the smell of broccoli, whatever it is. That's the smell that's here. The limbic system is really tied to your sense of smell. You have more emotions from the sense of smell than from any other sense there is. Not that you can't see something like on TV and start crying or whatever, but with smell, you have this high level of tying that to that. And a smell can evoke all kinds of memories, not just, hey, that's an apple and it smells good and I want to eat it, but you may have a smell of something like a certain scent. So like I used, back when I was like 16, I used some shampoo when I was visiting my dad. He lived in Dubai at the time. So every time I accidentally come across that shampoo, because I rotate out, right? And I don't even know the name of it, but I'll, rotate out and I pick that shampoo off the shelf. All of a sudden, when I smell that smell, I'm transported back to beach, warmth, sunshine, all of that. And it's a very nice, happy feeling because that's all pleasant memories for you. But it's that smell that has triggered that part of my limbic system, those emotions, and it's a pleasant time, a pleasant memory for me, and I can associate that with it. Likewise, it could trigger something negative, so that smell could associate with something that's much more negative, and so you would always have a negative response to that, or it might just not even associate at all. But your limbic system is tied in there. Very high in the nasal cavity, like I said. Normal inhaled air doesn't necessarily, it has to travel up higher than that to get to these. They do, this is the one that I told you that has that high level of sensory adaptation. So you get the chemicals that are binding to these receptors and it's sending the information, but after a while it just kind of stops sending that. So you stop doing that very, very quickly. So your sense of smell drops by half within just a second after stimulation. So you have to, re-stimulate it again to get at that information to go to the brain again. How this works, what we call the olfactory code, or the hypothesis of how our brain is actually reacting to all that. So the odor comes in as a chemical. It has a distinct set of receptor cells. So you've got different receptor cells for different types of odors that are coming in, and then those have distinct little associated proteins, and then that sends that information on. Let's do this and then I'll stop after this point. So mixed up senses. There's this problem in the brain sometimes with some people. We call it synesthesia. It's not really common, but it's not completely uncommon either. So 1 in 1,000. I mean, think about that in your like local area, your apartment complex, your subdivision, whatever you live in. 1 in 1,000 people isn't that too uncommon. But basically, remember that when the information comes into the brain, your brain has to, so it's actually coming in, let's do it that way, coming in the brain stem this way, and here's the spinal cord. So it's coming up here, and your brain says, send it to these areas for interpretation. Well, these areas sometimes are pretty close to each other. So sometimes when you're sending that information in, instead of being distinct areas for interpretation, those areas overlap. So you have built a memory, you have built a learning process where you've got this overlapping of that information instead of two separate distinct areas. So what happens in that person is things that shouldn't be stimulated are being stimulated. So for instance, letters or numbers. So I could say the number 4, and to somebody with synesthesia, this type, grapheme color type, that means something like yellow. Okay. So I say 4, their brain thinks yellow because the area is overlapping between what should be a distinct area for color and a distinct area for number. And they have associated 4 with yellow and maybe 3 with blue or something like that. Or maybe it's a number or letter or something. But it's an association that's occurred that really shouldn't be there. They've mixed that up, but their brain, it's a very physical act. So it's their brain has done that. It's not like we can fix that. The brain has actually overlapped those areas of neural transmission. Likewise, we can have what's called lexical gustatory. Gustatory is related to taste and smell. So something like music has a strong taste or a strong odor to it. So they hear music and they've got this whole sensation in their brain going on of actual taste and smells and stuff like this. Really makes these individuals really, really creative. Think about all of that interpretation. So now I'm not just saying, here's my letters and here's my words and here's my colors and here, categorized and all these things. All of these are like mixed and intermingled, and it makes them very, very creative in their thought process and their description process and painting and stuff like that too, because they can see the world differently than we do, very, very creatively. Why does this occur? Again, not necessarily one cause or one reason that we know of, but you could have damage to one portion of the brain from like a stroke or something that causes the brain to have to reroute. And so if this is the damaged part, it would have to pick up information somewhere else. So this isn't working. We're going to start transmitting it to this area. Remember, the brain is pretty malleable and can make up for a lot of damage. So it may be that it's overlapping because you have one area that's damaged. It seems to be an inherited aspect to it. So people who have this overlap tend to pass that ability on to others. So something in the genetics that we're not really pinpointed yet does seem to be more common in women. So women tend to have this creative aspect more so than men, or in terms of synesthesia. I'm not saying that women are more creative, but they do have this synesthesia aspect more often. Not entirely, just more often. And it is physical. Like I said, it's not that we can retrain them or they can relearn or something like that. It's an actual area of the brain. When they go in and they do a scan of it, they can see where in somebody else's brain you've got two isolated areas that are close together that are responding to these stimuli. You can see that their activity actually has that overlap, and it's shown with the glucose usage and the PET scans and the brain activity. We can see that the brain is actually working overlapping. All right, that's where I'm going to stop for this round of notes, and I'll pick it up with section 2 later.